Dear students, welcome in the beauty world of pharmacy. In today's lecture, I am going to conducting the information about the classification of the receptor family and what are the receptors. Then let's begin. In this topic, we will cover the points like introduction, types of the receptors, functioning of the cell surface receptors, ligand-gated ion channels, G-protein coupled receptors, enzyme-linked receptors, and the intracellular receptors. Then let's begin the introduction. Receptors are the biological molecule to which drug binds and produces a measurable response. Receptors are present on the membrane of the cell or inside the cell. The receptors that are present on the cell membrane are called as cell surface receptors. The receptor has a specific binding site where the ligand's neurotransmitter or a drug binds and shows its response. So receptors are the biological molecules. They are the biological molecules because they are produced within the body and produces a measurable response. So enzyme and the structural protein also be considered as a pharmacological receptors. Majority of the receptors are four types, and a molecule or a drug interact to a receptors to give the response, often called as ligand. Ligands are the molecules that binds on the binding site present on the receptors and shows actions. The type of receptors a ligand will bind is depend on the nature of ligand. That means receptors and the ligands are specific for the specific receptors. Hydrophilic ligand binds to the receptor found on the cell surface. Hydrophilic ligands are those ligands that bind to the receptors that are present on the cell surface. Because hydrophilic substances cannot cross the plasma membrane because of the nature of the plasma membrane is a phospholipid bilayer. It is a lipoproteinaceous in nature, so hydrophilic substances cannot cross the plasma membrane. Hydrophobic ligand can enter the cell membrane to interact the receptor present on inside the cell. Here, hydrophobic ligands that are lipoproteinaceous in nature can crosses the plasma membrane directly and interact with the receptors. That means bind to the receptors present inside the cell called as intracellular receptors. Here are some examples of the cell surface receptors. This is a cell membrane where different types of receptors are embedded within the cell membrane. Examples of the intracellular receptors. This is a nuclear receptor that are present within the cell, where DNA, cytosolic receptors, small hydrophobic signal molecules which is outside the cell, and carrier proteins which carry the signal to the cytosolic receptors to act the nuclear receptors. Then what are the classes of receptors? Receptors are mainly divided into two classes. First one is the cell surface receptors and second one is the intracellular receptors. Cell surface, as the name indicates, cell surface receptors, the receptors that are present embedded within the membrane of the cell, so it is called as cell surface receptor. And second one is intracellular receptors. Intra means within itself. The receptors that are present within the cell are called as intracellular receptors. Cell surface receptors are further classified into mainly three types. First one is a ligand-gated ion channel, G-protein coupled receptor, and third one is enzyme-linked receptor. Intracellular receptors that are present within the cell are classified into mainly one types, that is a nuclear receptor. Then let's begin the cell surface receptor. Cell interact with the environment through the cell surface receptors. The receptors that are present on the cell membrane are called as cell surface receptors. These receptors interact with the outer environment of the cell or the inner environment of the cell through this receptor. External stimuli to the cell surface. Signal transduction in terms of messenger molecule, cell behavior alteration like contraction, secretion, and metabolism. Here, listen. These receptors are present on the cell membrane whenever the simple impulse is generated. These impulse in the form of maybe a drug, neurotransmitter, or a ligand binds on the receptor. Then receptor get activated and shows its action by opening the ion channel for a particular ions. Influx of the ion takes place that causes the action potential within the cell, action potential, and this action potential transmit the messenger molecule to the brain, and the changes takes place like the contraction, secretion, and metabolism. In this way, cell surface receptor acts and shows its action. Here once again the classification of the cell surface receptor. I hope you will get all these points. In the next lecture we will study about the ligand gated ion channels. Thank you.